You know, the thing about having a buffer for your show is, well, when topical things happen, you have to sit and look and go, yeah, but this episode's going to come out a month from now. Is it still going to play then? Or do I have to go through and reshuffle everything and get it ready for come out more recently? And the good news is sometimes the discourse hands you a freebie and gives you an evergreen topic, and thus is the case. Recently on Blue Sky, there was a fair bit of discussion going on. Apparently this branched out of a discussion from Reddit, where a parent asked what science fiction books he should present to his daughter to read. And a lot of the classics of the golden age of science fiction got brought up, and I will point out, reasonably so, that, hey, some of these don't play as well now, and the question of, like, is it worth it to read the canon? And not just worth it, but do you actually need to read the canon? Or that sort of thing, a discussion of what makes a canon a canon. And I'm thinking about this because someone who's done my Appendix N of anime videos, I'm probably going to revisit that at some point in the future, and do another video. I have an idea for one more, and I have thought about also with my own podcast and the recommendations for stuff that we've done on the show and stuff I've recommended to have Blaine do on the Anime Explorations podcast. And what ultimately the conclusion I came to is, and this is to reference my post on Blue Sky, a friend of mine, one of the people I follow, commented, I don't see the canon as excellent or formative. The username is Lizard, by the way. I'll do a quick screenshot. I don't see the canon as excellent but formative, and that's a difference. These books were among the first to explore an idea, or the first that gave the idea wide exposure, and that idea is a core element of the genre today, is different from these books are military perfection. And indeed, I added to that, and would still add, that ultimately focus this video is things that are canon and things that are things I would recommend that you read and I think you might enjoy are not a circle. There may certainly and absolutely will be some overlap, but honestly, I would recommend Dune to people, particularly if they watched the movie and liked it. I would not necessarily recommend to a random person watching this channel, I would not necessarily recommend anything by Heinlein. Not because I don't think Heinlein has written good things or things that are enjoyable to read, but more Heinlein is tricky as an author, and some of his stuff has held up poorly. Some of his stuff doesn't hold up at all. Some of his stuff is decent. And same thing with Asimov. Same thing with any number of authors who were published in the 20th century. We'll just do the big wide swath there. And so that ultimately makes for, I feel, an important difference is, or to use a different example. Film studies courses will pick works out of the canon of film, and there has been much discussion and ink spilled by people much better literate in film studies than I, and other matters than I, about, hey, there are works that are in this canon that really aren't necessarily worth rewatching, or aren't even necessarily worthwhile as they're in their place in terms of this film's being for example. Classic example is Birth of a Nation often gets held up as one of the first films to have a full narrative. And people point out, no, there are other films that have done this, including films by African-American directors with African-American casts. Birth of a Nation gets held up like this because it got a lot of attention and a wide distribution, assisted by the fact that the film is racist as fuck. And it got added to film studies curriculums, often at universities that were predominantly white, by instructors who were predominantly white, and kept getting put before classes where arguably the film is fairly, like, not necessarily harmful, but not useful in terms of discussion of film. Mentioning the film exists is all you really need to do. For me, my example for this is whenever, if you went back and if you've been watching this channel for a while, you may remember my video I did on The Story of Film, a documentary miniseries about the history of cinema. And one of the things that film brings up as an example of significant moments in editing history, and that's something I'd seen brought up before I saw this documentary, is a particular shot from the film Un Chien Andalou by Louis Brunel. Translated title is An Andalusian Dog. If once I've mentioned that title, if you're familiar with any film studies history at all, you know exactly what shot I'm talking about. If you don't, and here's your content warning, it involves an injury to an eye. Now, not just eyeball, which is something that is a triggering thing for people, and it can cause like significant, not just gross out, but also can lead, potentially, depending on their background, can have a traumatic response or a trauma response. That's why if I was teaching a film editing course, I actually wouldn't use that scene. Is it important, informative to the history of cinema and the use of editing to use imagery to get a particular emotional response out of the audience? 100% absolutely. Are there other films that also did that well that are more recent and also don't involve eye injuries? Yes. 100%. Hell. There's a scene in Delicatessen, which involves characters, while two other characters are having sex in an apartment complex, who are doing activities rhythmically, painting walls, doing other stuff, in actions to the rhythm of the sex that is happening. And as the sex intensifies, so does the rhythm of those actions, and we edit between them and going on until the climax occurs and humorous slapstick thing happens with those other people to accentuate the joke. I would use that much more, because it is not just a single moment from a film, but it is also a way that editing over time can build up and tell a joke to a punchline, and with careful use of editing for the sake of not just symbolism and getting a little bit of a point across, but also for comedic timing. Much more useful example, I would think. But that's me. Whereas, again, too many documentaries about film and that sort of thing will go, what we need is this eyeball scene, and we're going to show it to you in documentary after documentary over and over again. Now, if you're doing a thing on the history of gore effects in film, then if you're going to do that, and absolutely 100% go for it, then use that shot as, hey, here's one of the earliest examples of a gore effect in film. It's a very effective one, and one that would not necessarily be used to the same effect for a while in cinema afterwards, and because of content restrictions and controversy of the film and that sort of thing at the time. And thus, in the history of using gore in film, worth it. That works. In the case of canon of science speculative fiction or anime or any other work or music, we, and I say we as the collective noun for critics, for film critics, for those who engage in criticism of film or music or literature or anime or whatever, it's important to distinguish this is a work that is a formative work in the genre, an inspirational work in the genre, and it's worth talking about in that respect. And these are works that I, the critic, the teacher of the class, or what have you, think is worth talking about. Because part of the thing also with the canon is it's not just leading to a degree of leading to a monotony in terms of the voices that are selected. Because oftentimes these canons are for lack of a better term, reinforcing that that someone will go, the camera work in Triumph of the Will is significant and important, and so we're going to keep including it on the lit rather than, like, say, looking for other films that did the stuff that it does but does it better, say Star Wars. We're going to keep Leni Riefenstahl and Triumph of the Will on the list and keep going back to it over and over and over and over. And this often comes to the lack of critical reappraisal because, it's in the canon. Maybe people saying it's in the canon for decades, perhaps even a century of the art form, depending how long it exists. Why would we consider reevaluating it when perhaps more recent examples make it more relevant? But on the other hand, sometimes a work just holds up, and it's in the canon for a reason. That's why these reevaluations are useful. But that also means when you're putting together a list for, if you're doing a course, if you're doing a listicle on a website, if you're doing or a listicle on a video or that sort of thing, when you're putting these things together, it is important not to say, I think this is formatively important, but also, it's important to say, and I like it, and I think you should check it out, with the first part, with the last part, I like this thing and I think you should check it out, I think it will speak to you, being far more important than, and I think this is formative to the genre. Akira is a visually engaging, exciting film. I picked it for the podcast for a reason, not just because it is a seminal work of speculative fiction, and anime speculative fiction is that. Not just because it is gorgeous animation, though that is significant. That part is a significant part of it, but I didn't pick it because it is part of the canon. I picked it because if you are into animation, animation itself as an art form, it's a great example of that. Whereas on the other hand, like, one of the works that historically has been considered part of the anime canon, because it was one of the films that lots of people had exposure to and had access to at the time, is Ninja Scroll. And I wouldn't give the same recommendation for that. It's also a very violent film. It's has very good animation, but it lingers on sequences of sexual assault in ways and has weird, let's just say, sex stuff in terms of elements of how sexuality is presented in the film, where I go, I'm not going to give this a blanket recommendation for like a podcast or that sort of thing. This is something where I will be selective and recommend it to audiences who are in something in particular, who do like stylish, ultra-violent anime. But if they're just looking, I want a cool action series, or even an action anime with samurai in it, I wouldn't pick that. I'd be more inclined to pick, Samurai Champloo, or even if you want, I want a stylish anime about people with katanas in historical Japan fighting demons, I'd pick Demon Slayer before I picked Ninja Scroll. They're both violent, but Demon Slayer doesn't quite have the same problems that Ninja Scroll has. Or even like a similar adaptation of the same material, the same novel. There is there's Kugan Ninja Scrolls, Basilisk, the Kugan Ninja Scrolls. I'd recommend that first, because it also adds an interesting sort of Romeo and Juliet, star-crossed lovers romance to the situation. Something that isn't in Ninja Scroll. Ninja Scroll is much more focused on a short, tighter narrative, but also much more on spectacle and lack of characters, and not so much a characterization. It's very much an exploitation film in that regard. Though, again, speaking of targeted recommendations, if someone said, hey, I like exploitation movies, I want an anime that's like that, then I would go for something like Ninja Scroll. Now, so again, that's where the difference between canon and actual recommendation list is valuable. And this is where my ultimate point to say is, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm looking for something for my new anime fan friend to watch. If I'm looking for something for my younger relative to watch for anime or read for speculative fiction, the most valuable answer to that question is not to go look through the lists of Hugo Award winners and say, yeah, this book that won the Hugo Award in 1960, that will speak to your kid. That will speak to your new viewer. This show that, this film that ran, like, Rotsuki Doji is not something I would recommend to most audiences at all. In the present day, if someone has said, hey, I'm a new anime fan, I go, nope, I'm not going to recommend that. Not unless they give me some specific information in terms of what other things they like before they say that. It certainly is a formative work in animation. It is certainly a work that has influenced numerous creators afterwards. But it's not something that necessarily will resonate with the viewer that I'm presenting it to. Instead, I would say this. Canon lists can often end up unintentionally forming as a form of gatekeeping. And that's a lot of it because how canonical works have worked, I think discussed at the beginning, within academic environments, within even ecclesiastical environments, in terms of, it's like these works represent what we are. And so to be a part of what we are, you need to watch these, you need to read these, and if you don't like them, then you can't be a part of this community. And I think that's unreasonable, like, for fandom, for being a part of a fandom, whether it's anime, whether it's science fiction, whether it's mysteries, whether it's rock or it's heavy metal music, whether it's or hip hop or what have you, going and say, hey, if you want to be a hip hop fan, you absolutely have to listen to Straight Outta Compton by the NWA. You absolutely have to listen to The Chronic by Dr. Dre. No matter what other problems you have with Dre and his views now, and whether you're financially supporting him, or things that are expressed in those music and perhaps misogynist attitudes, or anything of the sort, or homophobic attitudes, or you absolutely have to listen to, like, if you want to be a metalhead, you absolutely have to listen to Cannibal Corpse. Even if, like, no, actually, Cannibal Corpse, like, what their type of music they do doesn't fit for you, doesn't work for you. That the vocal style isn't what appeals to you. You like harmonies and that sort of thing in your vocals. Then, like, having these exclusionary attitudes regarding canon, and that this is the list of things you must watch and enjoy in order to be a fan. That's no bueno. When I pick shows for the Anime Explorations podcast for my friends to listen to, watch, and for you to listen to discussion to, my ultimate thing I'm picking is based on is these are things that I've watched that we can have an interesting conversation about, and that I hope that they will enjoy. I'm not always on the money there. Sometimes I've picked things that I haven't watched before, and we're all coming in cold, and we all don't like it, but we at least get an interesting conversation out of it, as was the case with Senko, even if it's the helpful Fox Senko-san. That one, like, that was a show I went cold in on. None of us particularly actually liked it. But we got an interesting conversation out of it, and that's what matters. So by comparison, like, whereas if I was going, no, I want to go down the list of the highest rated anime of on my anime list, and we're going to go through all of those. Like, it'd be tedious. We probably wouldn't have as good of a discussion. Are some shows that we think are going to be the canon are going to be discussed on here? And we've done Ninja Scroll and Ghost in the Shell and Bubblegum Crisis. We picked those because they were there were tabletop role-playing games based on those games, or based on those anime, and thus makes it worth discussing in the context of these are works that were culturally relevant at a particular time, and discussing the period. And also we have discussion of tabletop role-playing systems, and how gameable the world of these games, of this setting in this universe is. That works pretty well. Whereas, like, but I'm not going to necessarily do Ninja Scroll on here, not just because it's not consistently available. Well, I can't be certain that when it comes around, it'll be available for streaming, but also because, like, we've all probably, except for maybe Blaine, we've all probably seen it, and the discussion about it is it's going to be as an exploitation film because of the graphic violence and the nudity and that sort of thing. I'd be more likely to pick Samurai Champloo than Ninja Scroll. That's because I hate Ninja Scroll. I've seen it a few times, and I've gotten different things out of it each time in terms of how the scenes are presented and the way certain elements have been referenced in other works. But that doesn't mean it's somewhere where, like, oh, I want to talk about this with my co-hosts on that show. It's actually a thing that I have, while I am a Patreon backer for Jeff Thu from Mother's Basement, and he has his part of this podcast that he does for discussing the top anime, their podcast of Quest for the Best, what they're trying to pick out their view, the 100 greatest anime. I wish them the best. I'll listen to the podcast, but I think, well, they mentioned a couple times in their show that while we're about the journey than destination, I think, like, really what matters is what makes for a better podcast is less, this is what we're going to see if this fits on the list for the 100 best, and more, this is a series that has an interesting conversation. I like that lack of directed attitude, not lack of direction, but that need to classify and put a vault together attitude for that than for I don't like that attitude, that perspective that they're doing, and more of something like, for example, with Nextlander on the Watchcast, where yes, Vinny has his list of top films that they've covered over the course of the show. But nobody else has previously felt bound to make such a list. Alex Navarro did decide to do that, but that's because he felt like it. He wanted to. I have not put together any such ranking on for my show. I put a list together, but it's an unranked list because it doesn't matter like what order they're in. They're interesting shows or films that we felt would have a conversation. We get an interesting conversation out of them, and generally we have. Even the shows that weren't good, the Senko-sans, the Tsukihime, especially Tsukihime, have the ground for a good conversation out of them, if nothing else, of why this doesn't work for us or where this work went wrong, and perhaps whether the concept is worth revisiting and reevaluation. Sometimes the view is yes, sometimes the view is no. And in that regard, I realize I'm going in circles for a bit, but it bears repeating over and over again. That's why this is an evergreen topic rather than just me shuffling things around to make sure it's right here where the discourse iron is hot, is putting together a canon list does not matter. Don't be a canon gatekeeper. Be a sommelier. Be someone who, when your friends come to you and say, What anime should I watch? What science fiction novel should I read? What mystery novel should I read? What album should I listen to in metal or prog rock or classical music or jazz or whatever your genre or genres are? And be the person who can, or even just a single artist, even to say, hey, what's one Lady Gaga album should I jump in on? And be the person who can answer that question, be it the question that the person asking it, the answer that they were looking for. Not with, unless this is like a universal thing, unless going, you should watch, like, here's the Canon list. Here's the Canon list of heavy metal. Here's the list of the greatest guitarists of all times and the albums you should listen to. Here is your best. You want a little history of rock and roll? You need to start with the Beatles' first album. You need to start with Elvis Presley. Never mind that perhaps Elvis doesn't, like, perhaps because a lot of Elvis albums haven't actually aged well. Elvis as a person kind of was crappy. And some of his albums, and certainly a lot of his movies that those albums were attached to, just kind of sucked. So be the person who has the answer that the person who's asking them, or in terms of the recommendation, that has the answer for the work that's right for them, not the blanket, here's the canon, like this or get out. Don't be that asshole.
Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe. And also consider backing my Patreon. Patreon backers get episodes up to 1 week early of this show and any future Let's Plays. Also, please consider backing my Ko-fi. Toss me a few bucks also helps support the show, and it's not a monthly obligation or anything like that.